Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
Hello.
Hi.
Ah,
I just had a nice chat with Ryan,
oh,
discussing data, how we may think about learning from each other's data. It's a good conversation. I have a
cool.
couple of ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like the challenge with our group is not um having enough data or ideas, but the bandwidth of executing them,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
a great place to be.
Yes. Yes.
Good morning.
Morning.
Adam, I'll find a time to get back to you.
Yeah, no problem. I have a lot more time than you, so just let me know what works. I have, I think, 2 things next week, and that's all. So
Oh my God. Yeah, it's just not how it works.
it's not. It's. I'm sure it's not a vacation for you.
I'll be right back.
No, it is not. Um, Probably be toward the latter part of the week because I'm going to try to do some proposal development with the collaborator Monday, Tuesday. So I'm working around her schedule.
Yeah, just let me know.
Hey, there's Ellison. Well, I wanted to do we can do this while people are getting on, but I wanted to do a quick getting to know you. Just has anyone ever taken a survey that they actually liked? Like that was fun and insightful?
Liked, fun, and insightful, all different
Well,
criteria.
it doesn't have to be fun, but so like some of them are tedious and you're answering, but I think I've actually taken one and I don't even remember it, but I felt like it had something to do with energy, but it had images that I thought were really well chosen. And usually I poo-poo that kind of stuff, like, oh yeah, nobody knows. And then I looked at them and I thought, oh, these are really good. I feel like I have a choice that I would make. And I wish I remembered what it was. So I'm curious if anyone else has had the experience of taking a survey that they liked taking.
I took a. I've taken a few recently, as in the last several years, that have been, I guess, aimed at academics. That I thought were pretty good. There was one about um, replication and like publication strategies and things like that I thought got at some really important issues. And that's also, to be fair, got to be a little bit intimidating to think we're going to send a survey out to people that are survey researchers. I mean, we're going to survey the survey people. Um,
Have you
uh,
lied in the past 6 months?
yeah.
No.
And then I took another one that was, I wish I knew exactly what the methodology was, but it was an online focus group about Colorado politics. And we would answer questions, and some of it was sort of like a best worst scaling sort of things. And then we would come back and have like a little focus group where we would all click on it. It was really a neat design. And then actually, well, and they paid for it too, which may also color my perspective because I was paid fairly well for minimal effort. But I thought both those were great. Um, if it is, I will say, if it's a very poorly worded survey, they can sometimes just be kind of hard to get through at times too, even if you're trying to be a good citizen and answer questions.
Mhm. For those who have just joined us, I was doing a quick and random getting to know you by asking if anyone has taken a survey that they liked taking. and enjoyed. Is that a silence or just like people don't know what to say?
Oh, can we
I
just
did fill in the ACS
Yeah, you can
survey.
jump in. I wasn't gonna put names because
Okay.
I didn't think that everybody would have one.
go ahead, Karthik?
Oh, I think I recently filled in the ACS survey. And I was really
Oh,
Oh,
excited.
really?
Yeah,
You're
I was really
subject.
excited. So I was really excited because I was like, I'm gonna like reanalyze my own data like a year later. So I was kind of curious. So yeah, it's
That's
kind of
hilarious.
exciting. Yeah.
Were you gonna say something, Ellison?
I was saying, I don't know that I can think of one that I'm like, oh, that I like the design, but there are multiple that I care to respond to because they're asking me about something I care about.
Mm-hmm.
And they are, like Adam said, they've been well designed so they don't turn me off.
Mm-hmm.
I think I once did the REC survey
Oh.
in California, and it was cool because it was detailed energy questions. I was very interested, very keen, and so I took a lot of trouble to enter to answer all the questions.
Did you think it was a good survey when you took it?
Yeah, I did. I thought it was really
Good.
good.
Wow, that's
But
great.
it wasn't about people, right? It was more about the energy in the physical building and stuff like that. But still, I thought it was easier to be a good survey. That's what I mean.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I've checked out of surveys when I'm like, you are totally missing the point. Like I just
Yeah.
stopped them. You're never going to ask me a question that's relevant. Like I've taken once about academia and climate in academia, and I'm like, oh no, you don't understand.
Recently, I've had a few successful occasions where I haven't liked the survey or they really misjudged the length, in my opinion.
Oh
And
yeah,
I just
no.
wrote them, and I feel like I wrote not a mean email, it was just like, hey, I really cared about the topic. But when you asked this question, it was a big turnoff and it took me 3 times as long. Like I
Mhm.
would have been less irritated if you just estimated it correctly.
Mhm.
So, and I got a
Mhm.
response every time.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
I
shocking.
mean, I don't know that, I didn't go take the survey again to find out if they changed anything, but like, I think it felt a little bit empowering to be like, oh, I don't like this. I can let them know. Cause if I were the person that designed it, I was like, I would like to know.
Yeah, our energy company has sent me surveys. Hey, Stacy, we're talking about, have you ever taken a survey that you liked? And I just stopped and I was like, this is not a 20-minute survey. And I sent them an email, but they never responded. And then the next time I took it, it was just as bad. So I checked out. How about you, Stacy? Have you ever taken a survey you actually liked? We didn't go around the room and pick on people just in case that people would bring their ideas forward.
Okay, so I cannot remember the name. Okay, I can't remember the name of it, but like sometimes there are these like household consumer or like TV rating surveys where you get money for participating in them. So they're like, we'll give you $10 or we'll give you $20. And then I like getting the money for doing them. And then I sort of sit there brainlessly, like while eating a meal or like watching TV or something and not really answering the questions very well. Maybe survey designers don't want people to tell them that.
So you like being
I was
rewarded.
already excited when I was like, oh, they sent like that $1 in the mail, or $5 in the mail. I just have to like fill out these questions and return it. I'll do those. I like those.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in before we go on? Ellison and I are going to share what we did for participatory system mapping so far. And can you see my screen? I'm just going to leave it in this non-presentation mode so it doesn't take over my whole screen. I think I can do this. Yeah. So, Ellison, please jump in anytime, and also Nars, Raidul and Zara were present in the meeting where we did this, so if you have any observations, you're free to share. So what we did so far is we've been talking about this for a long time. We've reviewed some literature. There's a vast amount of literature, so we have not reviewed all of it. We're not doing a critical review or even selective review. There are a couple of researchers in the UK who have done a lot of work in the space of energy, in particular, like in getting community voices. And I was going to try to piece together a methodology from different pieces, but then they had a practical guide that was pretty much exactly what I would have looked for. And so I have been using that as the backbone. We drafted a script. I'll go over the highlights, and then I sent you all the link. And then we ran a trial. So our systems engineering department has a Friday event, was sort of a lunch. Sometimes they have guest speakers, and sometimes they have more professional development, like writing. So I thought that would be a good place to try this out. And I asked them if I could, and they said yes. So Ellison and I co-facilitated. However, what I had hoped to do was get people who were completely unaware of what we were doing, and so get some independent feedback. But then kind of at the last minute, the systems people said, oh, can we do this online and in person? And I said, I thought of it a little bit, and I said, no, I think we can do it in person. We wanted to do it in person. I believe we can do it online, but we could not do this as hybrid. And so I said that. And so then they decided not to invite the systems engineering people. They just invited people at our building, Powerhouse, where I think all of you have been. And so that ended up with a very different participant mix, including people from our groups, and some people who were really not systems engineering folks. And again, Zara and Raidul were there as observers, not as participants. Anyway, so we did that, and here's our report. I want to talk a little bit about the script. Some of you may have had a chance to look at it, but we talked a lot about it, and one of the first questions was, how do we get people to focus on what we want them to focus on? And so we started with, well, Ellison, you want to talk about this one, because this is what you led, so maybe sure. This would be better from you.
Yeah, I think Tami had shared the script, but you'll see the beginning is prompt, or the script reads, we want you to think about a change in your home that costs more than $1,000. It was very, from my perspective, it was broad, and then people had a chance to write things down on a Post-it, and then in the affinity grouping structure, somebody proposes something, and then other Post-it notes that are related go up with it. And I guess I'm thinking, Tami, of the things that like structurally we would do differently in order to accelerate that process. I don't know if those are as useful right now.
Yeah, I don't think we want to get into that now. We did reflect on changes that we could make, but I think that comes in the what would we do next? So
I think maybe the thing to say is that for the most part, I think we felt like the types of changes people came up with were aligned with what we were wanting people to think about. And they were diverse and but related to changes in the home there, and many of which were related to energy.
Yeah, I would say that is true. Also, yeah, I was expecting more divergence. Like, I thought we'd get a lot of things where we'd have to say no, that it's not that, but we did not.
Yeah.
Then the second was telling them who they were responding as. When we did the group interaction that Stacy led, one observation, I think, and I think Stacy made this, or Ellison made it, I can't remember, was that the people weren't responding as we thought they would respond. We were hoping to hear the voice of who they would work with rather than themselves, and they were really responding as what they would do. And so just recognizing that people come forward with different, like a different persona that they think we want to respond as, then we tried to center them in who we wanted them to respond as. And that wasn't, sorry, that's not very well said, but that's an idea that Ellison has brought forward before too, from different exercises. And so we actually had them just stop and close their eyes and center in their body, and then put their attention on that subject. And then we asked them to generate a list of factors that were relevant to the change. So they did individually first, write on Post-its, like what are all the things, one idea per Post-it. And then they discuss, after some time of them putting these ideas out, they discussed those in pairs. And then they did the affinity mapping exercise in groups of 4. And I just want to acknowledge here, I've had a bit of facilitation training. And so I might be using terms that are not familiar to a lot of people. And if there's something that you don't understand, please don't feel like you should understand it. Just ask what it is. So the I thought the 1, 2, 4 all is a kind of a common technique. Like you think, and then you pair, and then you group in 4, and then you go to all. And I thought this 1, 2, 4 worked really well. But the all, as you will see a little bit later, didn't work quite as well. Do you want to add anything here, Ellison?
No, not that we won't get to later.
Could I ask a question about the participants?
Mm-hmm.
Or will you be sharing, I mean, more detail about who they are, how many?
We did not gather demographic information on them. The goal was of this exercise was, this is not for research, right? Because we wanted to just try things out and not make it too serious and see how it flowed.
Yeah, like a pilot. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because so to do research, we have to do the IRB. To do the IRB, we have to submit the script. And until we have a script that we're confident in, we're not, there's kind of a chicken and egg thing there.
Got it. How many were there?
12.
Okay.
Oh, no, 16, sorry. 12 is the number we're seeking. Okay, and then among these groups that they had mapped on easel paper with Post-its, then we told them to draw arrows or connections, whether they were causal, whether they prevented each other, or whether each group maybe had a relationship but didn't have a causal relationship. And so that, I think, worked pretty well. And then because we wanted to recognize diversity, then we told them to use different size dots to show their individual opinions. Like, this is really important to me. This exists, but it is not as important. And this is really not for me. So there are little ones with a little X. And sorry, Ellison, did you want to say anything about any of these?
I think we said the prompt for relationships worked really well. That was up on the screen and was a visual that represented like where you would place the respective sticker. I guess I say that to mean, I don't think that people were unclear about what they were doing with the tools they had.
Right. Yeah, so we had a PowerPoint that said, this is a connection. Just because when you tell people things, invariably some don't hear it or don't understand it the first time. We didn't have the dots on the screen, so we were a little flustered with the dots. They were not completely ready, but they're ready now. I've made
Yeah.
envelopes.
And I don't think that limited people, I think that was our experience, but theirs was not as much impacted. That was my view.
Yeah, so then I tried something that I thought would be fun but did not work well, which was that, so now we have these 4 easel papers on the wall, right? So each group is 4 people and each one has an easel paper. And so we tried a gallery walk, which is where you move from one to another group and comment on it. And that, I have had that be really a generative exercise, but in this case, it did not work well. I think because the work of the groups had already been sort of coalesced, and so people were reluctant to comment on it, or it didn't really engender a lot of comment. So I was trying to take this to a product of everyone, but that did not is not something I would do again. And so we were hoping at this point to then have a sort of a causal map. And when I was building out the script, I recognized that there was going to need to be a coalescing step. And so we would probably need to have a second, like a second session. We only had an hour to do this because that was the length of the lunch. So we were constrained in that way. We didn't get to choose how long the event was going to be. And then everyone went and sat down and had a reflection, asked a couple of questions. This was Ellison's idea, and I thought it worked really well. Did we miss anything? Did you want to comment on that, Ellison?
Can I say, I can say a few things about the feedback we got at that
Yeah,
point.
sure.
I think this was helpful to note that most people felt comfortable. Very few people had something to point out as making them uncomfortable. Where they did express being uncomfortable was being different from the other people in their group, like like the people that were in the group that were faculty members, I suspect wrote like, I'm a homeowner, and that was in contrast to people that were renters and maybe had less familiarity or less experience or agency for the changes they were discussing. And then and maybe, what was it, Tami, 4 out of 12 wrote something related to time, like they felt like they had more to share if there'd been more time, or that the time felt short. Yeah, so generally positive, but it was, I think, useful to get the reflection on the experience.
Yeah. And I think so. Yeah, so that was the end. So then we have a summary of what we think worked well. Participants responded, they seemed engaged. That grouping of 4 seemed really good for everybody, was engaging in the discussion. And people seemed curious. Things seemed to go smoothly. It did fit within an hour. So that seemed to work. And then what didn't work, like I think we came out of there going, oh, that worked. And then after we looked at the results, then we didn't feel they worked as well. So the outcomes that we're going to show you focused more on the aspects of the technology, not the process of making decisions. So that's a big guidance that we need to do. And in these things, there's always a tension between how much you guide people, because then that limits what they're going to tell you, versus how open you leave it, and then you may get a bunch of stuff that is not relevant. So when you see these outcomes, the photos of their easel papers, you'll see that it's going to be hard to draw causal loop diagrams between these things. As I mentioned, the gallery walk was a little bit awkward. I would change that so that you could see what other groups have done, but then change your own. Ellison mentioned the time. And so I don't know if it's 90 minutes with a short break, doing 2 sessions, which then you have to hope that all those people come back, right? And then as Ellison mentioned, it's also hard to discern how you should group people, because if you decide on how they should be grouped, then you're going to get what you program, right? And so do we include homeowners and renters in the same group when the decision making is extremely different? So that's a question that we have to answer. And then there's some minor things about the script that we would adjust, but I think those are some of the big comments. And so I'm going to show you what people produced next, but Ellison, while that's happening, I'll try to zoom in, but maybe you could say anything that you thought needs to improve in addition. So,
I mean, I think the biggest thing was what you already highlighted. As people have a chance to see what's on these Post-it notes, it's very focused on the thing, like attributes of the change itself that might be influential, like cost or comfort or features, but not about how that change would take place. That was, I think, something we had hoped to elicit, but we did not provide a lot of structure for them to know that's what we wanted, because something Tami and I talked about that I think many people on this call might feel is things they already know, but the downside of telling them more about what we want to hear is that they will tell us what we want to hear and not what they actually experience. So I think where we are trying to think about the right amount of additional structure or sequencing to impose on the process to elicit more reflection on the process of getting a change done and not the change itself and what would make it worth doing versus not doing.
So that's 1 and 2, and here's 3 and 4. And again, the big dots were strongly important. And each participant within a group had a different color from the others, so that you could kind of see who was saying what. The little dots are, yes, this is important, but it's not dominant. And then if you see any X's, these little square ones with an X on it, this is not important to me. And I think there was still I think you mentioned this, Ellison, people didn't want to disagree with each other, right? Like, I feel funny disagreeing. Not everybody said that, but some people said that. And so I think that's something that needs to be emphasized, right? You can see this one is a little X here, and this one is a little, not as important. And so we need to emphasize that it is okay and really welcome to see not disagreement, but diversity.
Yes.
How did you ask them to indicate barriers? Like if you say one is blocking another?
That's actually what I was just gonna say, Narasimha, that
Okay.
there's an absence of those here. They did have stickers that had an X and that were on the prompt slide that showed the 3 ways you could. So first they draw arrows between things that are related, and then they add like it's big dot for very important, little dot less important, and then an X for like a barrier to And I saw very little use of the barrier.
So I think also we need to refine our directions, because they were supposed to put like a minus or frowny face or something, and you can see one of those here, right? If it was preventing, but I think there was some perhaps mix up between the X being this is not important to me versus the X being this is preventing. So that's a coding that we need to update.
And you had defined all those things at the beginning, right? That sort of like the terminology less important, more important. Use a smiley face for this. Those weren't sort of emergent.
We defined it on a slide at the time that they were doing it, but we didn't actually have a slide for the dots, which is a thing I would do differently.
Boy, that's tough, because if it's not done right, then you might not have two comparable.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things that need to be redone, right? This was our first, like, we knew this was going to be throwaway anyway. So since we had never done anything like this before, this was like, okay, let's see if this works at all. But you're right, that the more clearly they are defined and the more distinct the different possibilities are from each other, so they can't be mixed up, the easier and better the interpretation will be. Let me see if I have anything else. Okay, just the next steps. So we're interested in what folks are thinking, seeing. Not on here is we've talked about this as a component of feeding models and so on. And so even though it seems very far away right now, I want y'all to be thinking about it. And then how would we do major groupings, right? So renters, owners, landlords, should those be done separately? So they're like never put in the same group, never put in the same room. I think that's a really key decision. And then I can see a role for just continuing to try this, right? Again and again, we'll probably get better every time we do it, but we need about 12 participants. We had 16 groups of 12 would be probably minimal. Okay, Ryan's got a comment. And so where do we find these people? And they don't need to be super qualified. They just need to have experience living in a home. So Ryan says, it could be that they're mostly engineers. They think of this in a device-centric perspective. I'm sure we had at least a couple who were not engineers, but I would guess that they were mostly affiliated with Powerhouse in some fashion. And honestly, I don't know who some of them were.
Every time I go to Powerhouse, I feel like I need to know a lot about technology and devices, though. And so, like, I think if you do this in a different environment, it might be that your process was fine and you'll elicit different perspectives just because people there are preconditioned to think, one way versus another.
Yeah. One counter to that, though, is that I do think our script is focused on the change and like the purchase, if you will, because we have that piece of information about cost. And so I have wondered, and Tammy, when I've just been thinking through the week, I think they're reflecting that it's like it's, in a two-stage model, it's like the whether I will do this thing. And then once I've decided, we just didn't get to that part. I don't disagree that there's a potential that we're technology centric because of even just the building that we're in, and then the people that are in that room. But I also think the changes that went up on the on the board and the affinity groups to begin with were all like a one-time purchase. And I don't know that they shifted to thinking about how it would go into place in a home.
Yeah, I think we need to guide them a little better, but very gently, right? And one of the ideas that I had for revising the script is allow these things to come out. Like, okay, now let's talk about things that you value about a purchase. And now we're going to talk about the process of change so that you can, like, it may be that these come out naturally, these things, and we need to allow a place for them to come out naturally before we start talking about the change process itself. So that would be my second try, but then we have to see how it goes. Like sometimes I can imagine how it goes and I'm right. And then sometimes it's like results in something totally different. I go, oh yeah, it's like teaching, right? You think you have a good presentation and then your students go in a totally different direction and you're like, wait, I can see how that happened, but it's not a thing I ever would have predicted. Yeah. This is in the drive, so if you want to dig into the photos, I'll put the link. In fact, I'll put the link in the chat right now, but it'll also show up in the call notes.
This might be like a philosophical question, but I know there's like a bit of literature on like pre versus post assessment of decision making. And like, do we see this as like an ideal type model for how that decision making process would work? And is there a potential to like, take, Chris's model and say, well, how does this map onto like what actually happened? And, when we ask people afterwards, like, is there a different perspective there? I don't know if that's a well-formed question, but essentially I'm curious about the pre versus post aspect of this.
And Ellison, you brought this up too, like we should perhaps just ask people how they didn't make a decision like Chris is doing. And I'm really curious about Chris's comments on this. Because it's not even pre versus post, right? It's theoretical versus actual.
So
Is
like to
that-
me, it's like ideal type. I don't know what other people would call it, but
Yeah, when you were saying pre-post, is that somewhat similar to that idea of like they're thinking about a decision in theory versus one that they've actually done and made?
yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I'll just say something really briefly and then maybe because Tammy, I think rightfully was asking if Chris had some insight, but one thing that we talked about and that I feel is important is for people that haven't taken action, they maybe have thought about wanting something and have experienced such high barriers. Like I live in a house where I'm not allowed to make changes at all, or I can't get my landlord to pick up the phone. Like those things would be helpful to elicit. And so I haven't wanted to exclude people that have maybe never made a decision, because a few people reflected, I have never owned a home, and so I've never made one of these decisions. But I would prefer to err on the side of including them, but try to elicit their experience.
Is there a way to do a post on people who haven't made a decision? Like just say like focus on that decision that they wanted to make? That's hard to find, right?
It's like an intention group. Like I intended to do this and I didn't.
Yeah, you could probably think of some purposive sampling strategy to find those folks. I mean, you know, Ellison, not saying we could use it for this, but Ellison and I have that data from the energy efficiency evaluation project that we did. And there were people that had expressed an interest in an energy efficiency program but never done anything. So, you might be able to find there might be some sampling strategy to target those folks that have would be candidates, but have not participated or made a decision. It takes some novel thinking though.
Yeah. But I think it's worth doing because so for me, the goal is comparing what does happen with what modelers think happens. That's one goal, not the only goal. And so I feel like it's just as spurious to compare what some random person thinks happens within the model or thinks happens, right? Chris, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on this, because you've really been digging into what people say about change.
Yeah, just a couple initial impressions, more based on just the discussion that has been occurring within the past couple minutes. But one thought is that you know, there are people I've interviewed that obviously have made changes, or they wouldn't show up in the sample. But there are some people who, despite making some changes, have not made others. So in that sense, it would be kind of interesting to perhaps compare with what you'll find here. And then another thought is that as Ellison was talking about, you know, talking to people who are more or less at the mercy of what their landlords do. That is not coming up in my sample, in part because, again, we're more or less sampling from homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be really helpful to find a group of people who don't have that level of control over what changes they make.
Stacy, I've been interested in how you would see this, given the type of work that you do. And my question to you would be something like, who do you think the groups are? But you can answer any question you want if that's not a good question for you.
Yeah. I mean, maybe my own comment is that I think it would be really interesting to redo the activity with just different population segment, if it's possible.
And so maybe open this question up. Okay, so this was a convenience sample. We knew they gathered, and so we wanted to do somebody, and so there they were. And obviously we're going to have to be more targeted about that. Do people have ideas of where 12 people gather and might have an hour and a half or so, and would be willing to do this, because it's not that easy to get people together. And so I was looking for sort of natural gatherings of willing people.
Community center of a retirement 55 plus community where all of the people are owners of their own homes, but they're retired, so they're there and bored.
Community center, okay. Keep them coming, people. Like Ellison and I or I and Ellison suggested we're doing a presentation. I guess you're not doing in this presentation, Ellison, but we're doing a presentation later this month on air quality and equity. So, and some of the audience that turns up is from that retired crowd, like they have interest in these things. So we were going to advertise there. But I'd love to have just a range of people that we could sample before, like, who would be willing to be experimented on? We just need to see if this works.
I think the public library could be somewhere that also helps like advertise and gets people out on an evening. People might be open-minded, and again, it's all sort of like, you know, convenient sampling. It's like who shows up, just whoever's in the room.
Yeah, I think we'll be really more careful once we're doing the actual research. But I think for at least 1 or 2 more rounds, we're just gonna need people to experiment on. And then it's hard to pay them because the university won't let you pay somebody for something that's not research.
Yeah, which is why I think you kind of couch it with like, let's have a conversation about our utility bills and like, let's talk about it and do this sort of activity in a public library setting.
Yeah, yeah.
Chris or Nessa? You have your hand up.
Nassima, your hand is up. You're so polite.
Yeah. Yeah, I was just thinking about who to ask. And it seems that it's hard to find people. We're going to anyway have just a few groups of people. So, I'm thinking about the generalizability or not just having random opinions of a few people. So in that sense, I do think it's useful to focus on homeowners and not renters. And I would even go further and suggest that if the theme so far in Chris's work has been people who've already made a change, stick with that theme, but try and find a broad audience. This goes to Ryan's point about people who've actually made a decision, and maybe use the list of people who've actually filed permits in the past from his records and sample from them and ask them if they're willing to come in and be part of this group. So then you're just trying to find out what different decision processes people have used, homeowners who've actually made these decisions, and how those change, how those differ. And maybe you can do some sampling among them to try and diversify the group in terms of demographics, background, or whatever, but they all share the characteristics that they're homeowners and they have made some change. So they've actually thought it's not so hypothetical. And to me, at least, then we have a common theme in the project of people who've made decisions. Let's understand better the diversity of processes among them.
Would that not interfere though with the sampling that Ryan and Chris are doing for the interviews? Because I thought they're drawing from that population.
We have so many that, I
You
mean,
have so many?
yeah, I mean, there's like thousands of permits, so we've only emailed 500 people. So like, I think that's an infinite pool in some ways.
Okay. These are all really good ideas and will be taken under advisement. I don't have anything else other than where we are and what our questions are now. So feel free to provide suggestions and thoughts going forward. Ryan, take a liberal arts version.
Yeah, I think we could do that. I actually think we could get pretty good turnout if we were like, hey, we need your help understanding this. Like, and it's always helpful for people to learn research methods. So I think people would be intrigued in showing up. I also like, am I the only person who looks at the picture and like panics from an analysis point of view of like, how are we actually going to do data analysis on this? Or is that like, I don't know. That's how I feel. I'm like, oh no.
So that's why Raidul is an observer, is that what we would like to do is compare it using network methods. But I don't know how to do that yet. So Raidul and I are going to be talking about that. And that was another reason for doing this, even though it's imperfect, is to give an idea of what kind of stuff is going to be coming out and see if it's tractable for that kind of analysis, or if not, what we need to adjust.
But so like in a similar vein to that, so like you did this meeting, we have like 2 flow diagrams that emerge from it, or were there more than that and we just don't have them here?
There's 4, yeah.
So like, I guess like from a network perspective, like that's like a tiny N. And so like, how many of these meetings theoretically do we need to do to make this work?
So the network is not, okay, so you're thinking of a different kind of network analysis, I think, Brian. But in terms of turning it into a causal loop diagram that can be described by network principles such as nodes and connections, that's the sort of thing I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of analyzing a very simple network and using comparison metrics to say how similar they are.
Yeah, sometimes, Ryan, I mean, it depends on the study, but sometimes the diagram itself is the output, right? That there's no additional
Yeah.
kind of modeling of, I mean, there's probably all kinds of fancy things you could do. And these actually, I mean, these actually don't look that bad. At least, I mean, I've seen some in the literature, I'm sure you'll have too, that are just, it's hard to know what to do with them because it's just too many and too many relationships. And I think there's a tension between wanting to have the most comprehensive model or map, whatever you want to call it, possible versus wanting to identify sort of key places for intervention. Because you see some of these in the literature, and it's I mean, it almost hurts your eyes because there's just so much happening.
Mhm.
Which is maybe that's what you want if you're trying to be as comprehensive and as systematic as possible.
But I think that part of the interest, or part of my interest here, is that I think when this is really successful, the group itself actually agrees on the simplification.
Mhm.
So that would be another reason to have another session where the group agrees on the simplification, so that then you can identify the leverage points. Because the distilling is part of the work.
I make one more comment along these lines.
Yep.
Or do you not have time?
No, I need to go soon, but you can have a comment and then I'll address Stacy's comment.
Yeah, just quickly. I mean, I do think the decision process is what we're after. This is what seems to be not happening. I feel, people aren't committed to really making a decision when they're just thinking about stuff that's important, what's important, and they think exhaustively about, this is important, that's important. But in real life, a few things really rise to the surface that really make a decision. How do you make that happen, And I think that commitment to putting yourself in the mindset of actually making a decision is not happening when you're just casually kind of listing factors. I don't think people are taking 25 factors and putting them into a decision tree when they make a real decision. So how do we get them to think like that? Or, that's what I feel we need to work towards somehow. Maybe just say, think of the five most important things that will really drive a decision, and how would you take them into account? I don't know. I don't know how to do it exactly.
So Narsima, I think that refinement piece is really important, could be guided, but that has to be carefully done. And that is why I thought we needed a potentially second session, so that everybody, including the participants, could have time to reflect on it and then sort of come back, have a presentation by the researchers saying, okay, look, here's what we saw. Now let's identify what really happens and what's the diversity among it. Stacy, to your point, does it need to happen in person? No, it certainly could be online, but I would not try it as a hybrid exercise. I would not have some in-person people and some online. I think that would just make
That
it
would be
impossible.
messy.
Yeah, we did want to develop the in-person part because some of the people that we want to hear from may not be comfortable using those electronic techniques, but that doesn't mean that other groups couldn't be engaged in that way.
How many
Okay,
facilitators? Sorry, just how many facilitators does it take?
Ellison and I did it for 16. I didn't feel like we needed more people, especially if the preparation is done. I did spend a substantial amount of time, making sure the materials were all there, setting up the room and all that stuff, but that can be done in sequence.
Sorry, thank you.
But we did need two.
Okay.
Wouldn't you say, Ellison?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, I thought two made it. I think it could with 16. It would have been doable with one, but I think it went better with two. I think there was something for the other person to be doing every point in time.
I wouldn't try it with one just because if something goes out of control, then that one individual is then consumed and then the whole thing sort of walks away from you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's more of a metastable state if it's just one.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for listening, everyone. And we are off next week for CSU spring break. So we'll be back to you later. You. Huh. Okay, thanks, Ryan. Good point. I'm saving this chat. Good info. Thank you.
Thank you.
Saving the chat.